Zealotry, incompetence, thinking dirty. Hardly the words one would want used to describe the goings-on in the office of Ontario's chief coroner. And yet that and worse have been said since the work of disgraced forensic pathologist Charles Smith came to light. His shoddy conclusions destroyed lives. He wrongfully accused and helped convict parents of murdering their own children. He tore families apart. A new book by journalist John Chipman tells the story. It's called Death in the Family, and he joins us tonight. Also with us is Brenda Wadby. She knows this story most painfully as someone erroneously charged with second-degree murder and child abuse in the death of her daughter, Jenna. I welcome both of you to TVO tonight, and I really thank you for coming in to help tell what is an awful, awful story that actually happened here in the province of Ontario. I have to remind myself that this really did happen. John, I want you just, maybe for newcomers to our province who weren't aware of the story or when it all happened, when did this happen? How many cases were involved? Start with just some of the basic background.
Yeah, so Charles Smith was the director of the Ontario Pediatric Forensic Pathology Unit, and he took that position in 1992, and he was basically responsible for all of the, had a hand in all the suspicious children's death cases throughout the 90s until things kind of collapsed for him in 2001. And when they eventually did a review, they looked at the suspicious death cases that he was involved with.
How many cases roughly?
45. 45, and they found problems with 20 of them. Of those 20, 13 involved convictions, one of which was Brenda's. And of those 13, 7 of them have since been overturned, the convictions set aside, in some cases acquittals put in their place.
Brenda, I feel guilty asking you to review some of the worst moments of your life here, but I thank you for coming in because I think it will lead to greater good. So let's start with this. Tell us about Jenna.
Jenna was a very bright, energetic little girl. She was 21 months old when she passed away. And today she would be 21 years old. There is a cycle with her. It started with her death in the funeral home. And it moves on through all the legal battle to the end where she was exhumed and I reunited her. I made her whole. During that process, we found such indignities to her body that was incredible. But now she's finally resting.
How did she die?
I wasn't home. I was out that night. I came home and there was flashing lights outside my home. I was told that evening that she had bumped her head on the slide, so I thought nothing terribly wrong. And when I went to the hospital, she was already gone.
When you were eventually charged with her murder, what went through your head?
Many things. I couldn't believe it. It was full of disbelief. I didn't understand. I gave a statement at the police department that day, I didn't want to go to jail. I had to be out to fight for my other daughter. I was completely and utterly in disbelief that I was being accused of such a heinous, heinous crime.
You knew you didn't do it.
I knew I didn't.
How frustrating was it that you were apparently unable for a good chunk of time to convince authorities of that?
Well, when you scream and scream and scream and it falls upon deaf ears, it's so frustrating. There is no words to describe the isolation that you feel if only one person listens. And it took a long time before anybody heard.
Did you go to trial?
We had a preliminary hearing, and I was committed to stand trial on her murder.
But never had to.
No.
How come?
My daughter was in the custody of Children's Aid.
This is your other child?
Yes, my oldest daughter. And my understanding is if I pled guilty to a charge of a Child and Family Service Act charge, that they would withdraw my murder charge. So I did.
And what did that then do with regards to your other child?
Justine was still in care. That gave me the ability to at least fight for her. I was pregnant with my son at the time. So I was at least free to fight. And it was a fight.
Because while you may not be going to jail for murder, they say, well, you've pleaded guilty to child abuse, so we can't let you be reunited with your other kid.
Exactly. You still abused another child.
So Charles Smith's false testimony not only had an impact on your relationship, admittedly, with your deceased child, but also with the child that was still alive and maybe your future child.
Absolutely.
How long did it take before you actually found out the truth about Jenna?
Oh, okay. So at the inquiry, some of my questions were answered.
We should just explain. The public inquiry you're talking about was presided over by Mr. Justice Stephen Gouge.
Absolutely.
The Dalton-McGuinty government in the mid-2000s appointed him to basically get to the bottom of everything.
Yes.
Okay.
So the babysitter was arrested in 2005. He gave his statement. In 2008, the inquiry came. Some of my questions were answered, some weren't. In 2010, Jenna's ribs that were held at the coroner's office were returned. So part of that was answered. And finally, at my appeal, more questions were answered, but then we go to the exhumation, and it just led to a whole bunch of new questions that will never, ever be answered.
The appeal you talk about is the one over the child abuse
Yes.
situation.
Yes.
So from the moment of Jenna's death to when you are finally in the clear, how many years?
15.
15 years.
15 years. And I didn't see the babysitter's confession until 2011, so that was 6 years after he pled.
John, what went wrong here?
Well, I mean, Brenda's case really points out something that I wasn't really aware of when I started this. Was it's the intersection between the criminal system and the family court system that oversees child protection. You know, what is interesting about Brenda's case is that her daughter died, and she pled guilty to abusing that child to save herself, ostensibly from a murder conviction. But I think, you know, Brenda, you told me that wasn't really what was driving it. What was driving it was the fact that her other daughter was in care. And the clock starts ticking as soon as they go into care, regardless of what the circumstances are, regardless of what's happening on the criminal side. And eventually that clock, it strikes 2 years and the child goes into the adoption system. And so the choice that Brenda is really faced with is, I can fight this, I can fight the criminal proceedings, but even if I win the criminal proceedings, I could lose my daughter, my other living daughter, forever to adoption. And that ultimately, and that's not Dr. Smith doesn't do that. And there isn't anything, there's no one doing anything wrong in that. That's just the way that the systems intersect, and it creates an incredible hammer on people to make choices. When I got into this, I didn't understand how a parent could possibly stand up in a court of law and say, I did something, when they didn't really do it.
But the clock is ticking.
The clock is
so
ticking.
That has an influence on it.
You
all.
look deeply and you can start to understand how people can make those type of devastating decisions.
How did the autopsy in Jenna's case fail her?
So the autopsy, Jenna's case is different from a lot of the other cases because Jenna was killed. You know, in most of Charles Smith's cases that he was involved with, he created crimes that didn't actually happen. In Jenna's case, she was killed, and the question was the timing. You know, Brenda left Jenna and her other daughter with the babysitter, and so the question was, did the fatal injuries happen before Brenda left her with the babysitter or after? And Charles Smith initially he was a bit wishy-washy initially, but eventually over time he solidified his opinion that they happened 24 to 28 hours before, and that was how Brenda became a suspect. And the other issue that was key in the autopsy was whether she was sexually assaulted or not. And in the initial findings of Smith and a pediatrician, a doctor that worked with the suspected child abuse and neglect team at Sick Kids, who kind of informally consulted, was that she wasn't sexually assaulted. But there was evidence that was misplaced for years and years.
Hold that. I got that right here. This is from your book. Dr. Charles Smith had found a hair in Jenna's pubic area during the autopsy. What's more, Smith had brought it with him to the preliminary hearing, tucked into a sealed envelope. That hair was in his pocket at the very moment he was denying its existence on the stand. Why did Dr. Smith lie about that?
I mean, Dr. Smith, the way he tried to explain that when he was questioned about it at the judicial inquiry was that he didn't make the connection between the hair that he was being asked about at the preliminary hearing and the hair that he had in his pocket. Now, you have to make your own decision as to whether you think that is reasonable.
What's your conclusion?
It's hard to believe that he didn't know what was going. And
Strange
why would he bring it with him to the preliminary hearing? You know, it's a question that I wasn't able to. I mean, there's a lot of questions that I had for him, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to speak to him for this book. But that would be at the top of the list. I mean, the way he tried to explain it was that the hair that he took off Jenna's body, he felt was a contaminant. You know, maybe it was his hair, or someone else's hair that had fallen on her. And the way that they were describing it in the preliminary hearing was a pubic hair, and he said that I didn't make the connection between the two, even though, as you said, it was sitting in his pocket as he was asked.
The police used some different tactics in Brenda's case that I think we need a better understanding of. For example, the Reid technique.
Yeah.
What does that refer to?
Well, I mean, first off, they're not different tactics. Like, the Reid technique is a series of interrogation tactics that are widely used. They are basically the norm in interrogation techniques in interrogation rooms across Canada and across North America. Really, the exception is the people that don't use them.
Okay, how does it work?
Well, basically, they're very effective at getting people to confess. They are not very good at telling the difference between true confessions and false confessions.
Well, that's interesting, because once you were subjected to the Reid technique, you fessed up.
I did.
And you didn't do it.
And I didn't.
So why'd you fess up?
I was put into a room, and Jenna's autopsy photos were in front of me. The officers left the room and came back in. For 8 months, they had told me I had done it. This is what you've done, over and over and over. And I needed to get out. I couldn't go to jail on a charge like that. I couldn't stay in there. So my confession was I may have, possibly.
But they put the suggestion in your head to begin with.
Absolutely. And they actually, at the grave, I took the undercover officer to the grave, and she put the suggestion in my head that there may have been a memory lapse.
Do you ever hear back from any of the officers involved in any of this after the fact, when you've been officially cleared?
No.
No. There's no apology?
No.
There's no, we kind of got this wrong?
No.
Nothing, eh?
Nothing.
How often, John, when these techniques are used, do you suspect we get false confessions?
It's hard. It's really hard to say exactly how much. I mean, there have been a number of studies done in the States, and they find varying degrees, but it clearly is an issue. There have been steps taken, you know, in Canada. The Royal Constabulary, the police in Newfoundland have moved towards using a different system because of the concerns.
The Royal Constabulary, what are they called?
The Royal.
It's in the book, I forget. Yeah, anyway, yes.
The police in Newfoundland.
Yes, that's it. Can you tell us, so how many kids you got now?
I have two.
How old
I
are they?
have three altogether.
You have
but
three?
I have two that are alive.
Two are alive. How old are they?
Justine is 27, and my son, who cannot be named, is 17.
Why can he not be named?
Because he's under the age of 18, and there is a court order.
How are your children doing today?
Justine is doing very well, and my son is doing very well. They cope. They cope with what happened.
And how are you doing today?
Well, I cope. We'll see how the weekend's up. And my story's now finally told, all in one setting. So I can now finally grieve for the loss of her.
I mean, this clearly ruined your life for at least 15 years. Do you think this has ruined your life forever?
There will always be anger and bitterness towards this system in this province. But at some level, I've found peace with my failures and my shortcomings. I have to leave everybody else to find their own peace. I've found mine, and that was making her whole.
Do you still hold out hope that at some point in the future, somebody in a position of authority is going to come to you and say, "We're sorry"?
On my appeal, Alison Wheeler, who was my crown, she made a genuine apology from the AG's office, a genuine apology. But she came in so late in the game. It's the other people that were involved at the beginning and the middle. They will never apologize. And I'm not sure why. I wish they would. It might help healing, but I don't think so.
There's something that I suspect Ontarians take for granted, which is the presumption of innocence as we go about our daily lives. You've kind of never really had that, have you?
No. I was under the presumption of guilt.
Yeah.
I didn't start off on a fair footing. I was guilty. And I was viewed that way all the way through it.
Do you feel different now that you, thanks to this book, thanks to the Gouge inquiry, you have that presumption of innocence now?
I do.
Does it feel different?
Absolutely. I mean, with John's book, there's been a weight lifted. He is one of the very few people I trust. And that's hard for me to say, as he knows. But it's finally there.
John, let's talk about this book and how you got onto this topic in the first place. There's a million stories out there. Why this one for you?
Well, I mean, I'm a journalist. My day job, I work with CBC, and I followed the Charles Smith stuff as it was happening, but I didn't really connect to it in a super meaningful way until it was the fall of 2007. I was driving home, and there was a news report on World at 6, and it was about Bill Mullins Johnson, who was another one of the Charles Smith cases. He had convicted, spent 11 odd years in prison for murdering and molesting his niece Fallon.
Which he did not do.
Which he did not do. But what really struck me about this particular report, which included clips of Bill talking at his appeal hearing, was, there was only so many people that had access to Fallon. Bill believed that someone had killed his niece, and he knew that he hadn't done it, and the only other person, if he didn't do it, was his brother, Paul, Fallon's father. And so he went to prison eventually. These are two brothers who were very tight. Bill was living at Paul's house at the time, and he was helping him get back on his feet. And initially, Paul couldn't believe that Bill did it, and Bill couldn't believe that Paul did it, but the force of the system, the police investigation, the trial and stuff, they came to believe that, Bill thought that he was doing a crime for Paul. Paul thought that Bill had done these heinous things, and then 10 years later, a lawyer working with the Association of Defense of the Wrongfully Convicted shows up in Bill's cell and says, "We think that you've been wrongly convicted." And his first question is, "Who do you think did it?" And he thinks he knows the answer, and the answer is, we don't think anyone did anything to Fallon. And that idea of two brothers turned against each other, I was like, well, that's one story. What is going on with the rest of them?
So never mind father-daughter, and never mind uncle-niece. The two brothers
it's almost biblical.
are
turned against
their
each
collateral
other.
damage in all of this as well. You had, as you told us a while ago, I guess almost 4 dozen cases to consider when deciding that you wanted to write this book. You sort of categorized them, right, into figuring out which ones you wanted to write about? What were the categories?
Well, so there was 20 cases of the 45 that they found problems with Smith's work, and I looked at the 20 cases, and they seemed to break down into 3 distinct categories. There's the wrongful accusation cases, which ostensibly the system worked. It was either the people went to trial and they were acquitted, or there was a police investigation and they decided not to lay charges for a variety of reasons that we didn't get to the conviction stage. And so there was a case, of course, in those situations, when you look at the details of the specific cases, there was huge ramifications for the families involved, for the parents, for the caregivers involved. And so I took one case, Leanne Thibault out of Sudbury, and took a look at her case. And then the other two categories are both wrongful convictions. One of them is the traditional sense of wrongful conviction, which I think a lot of people think of when they think of wrongful convictions. And that is someone who says, I didn't do it. I'm not saying that I did it. And they plead not guilty. They are punished for saying not guilty, they are convicted, and they go to prison for a significant amount of time. And in the book, Bill Mullins-Johnson is one case. In the book, I end up talking about Tammy Markhart, now Tammy Wynn, who was convicted of murdering her son Kenneth. And then the second kind of wrongful conviction is the wrongful pleas. This notion, as we talked about before, is a parent is facing murder charges, and for a variety of reasons. And I think in the end, the largest reason was the impact, because often they have other children, as Brenda had with Justine. They plead to having a hand in the death of their child, to a lesser charge, basically.
Could you determine whether all of the parents involved in these awful situations had anything in common?
I think that the thing that really came across is almost to a T, and this is not, it's not everyone, but a lot of people were marginalized. They were struggling in their personal lives. Perhaps they were dealing with drug and alcohol dependency problems. Perhaps they were single parents and they were having a hard time raising their kids. CAS, they may have already been involved with Children's Aid. And I think that it was easy for the authorities, including Charles Smith, to just make those leaps of logic, that because they were having problems in their personal life, they could have done these heinous acts.
And they presumably, because of those personal problems, didn't have the strength to fight the system.
And they didn't have the support. That is the big thing, is you need to have support to navigate the criminal justice system.
I think the two words that are going to stay with me long after this interview is over, when I read the book, well, you'll see them here. This is Memorandum 631. Sheldon, let's bring this up. The memorandum reads, unfortunately, in this day and age, child abuse is a real issue, and it is extremely important that all members of the investigative team think dirty. They must actively investigate each case as potential child abuse and not come to a premature conclusion regarding the cause and manner of death until the complete investigation is finished and all members of the team are satisfied with the conclusion. John, who wrote that memo?
That was written, it came out of the chief coroner's office, and I think it was written by, I don't know, when they talked about this very question at the Gouge Inquiry, and they were a little bit wishy-washy as to who actually, no one wanted to take ownership of it later, but it basically, Jim Cairns, the deputy chief coroner, and the chief coroner, James Young, were the ones that were ultimately responsible for it.
And why was their philosophy of think dirty? Why did they take that approach?
Well, there was a feeling in the coroner's system, not specifically in children's deaths, but there was a feeling that there was crimes that were going undetected. There was a couple cases, and probably the highest profile one was Tammy Homolka, Karla Homolka's younger sister. And they initially, in the end, it was found that she had been drugged and sexually assaulted by her sister and Paul Bernardo, who Karla was married to at the time. But initially, it was viewed as an accident, and they missed that. And of course, Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka went on to commit other crimes, and there was a feeling that if they had have got that right initially, then perhaps they would have been able to save the other crimes. So that's what's really interesting, is it starts from a good place. You want people to be vigilant, but they have to know what the rules are. And clearly Charles Smith and other people who supported and enabled him stepped over lines that they shouldn't have stepped over, even if it was in the guise of trying to do something good.
Brenda, have you had a chance to meet others who have been through what you have been through?
Yes.
And share some of the details, if you would, about those experiences when you would meet up with other parents who had similarly been inappropriately accused of doing bad things.
During the inquiry, many of us were there. Outside the inquiry, I speak to Leanne Thibault. There's another woman by the name of Sherry Charette. I'm friends with her. It's interesting because out of this tragedy, friendships have grown. And we all have a common bond, and that's we've all lost our children. and we are support to each other.
I mean, it's one thing to lose a child. That's the worst thing in the world you can have befall you. But then to be unfairly accused of having something to do with your own child's death, that's a pretty awful club to be a member of, isn't it?
It is. It's not a club I wanted. I did not want to be here.
Well, let's take another step back here. It's almost 7 years ago that we actually had Mr. Justice Stephen Gouge in this studio talking to him about the value of public inquiries. And we have a little clip that we want to play of what he had to say about that. Sheldon, roll it if you would.
Part of it, though, is, as Ed's tried to describe, shining a light on an aspect of our society in which there has been a significant problem, and the very transparency of an inquiry, I think, is a benefit to the public. And part of it is, as Dennis and I both were able to do, meeting with those who may have been victims of these crises and being someone that society has clothed with the authority just to listen. And that has an enormously beneficial effect to those who've been victimized by these crises.
Can't underestimate that.
No, it's in a sense a truth and reconciliation process in a small way.
Did you get that feeling of having been heard? The truth is now out. There's some effort at reconciliation as a result of the Gouge inquiry?
I did meet with Justice Gouge. And when I met with him, I did get to tell some of my story. My former defense counsel, that was my criminal counsel in the 90s, he did most of the talking. I kind of wish that we, as the victims, could have testified, because perhaps maybe some of the lingering questions that we have could have been cleared.
But it was, is it your view that it was a good thing they did that inquiry and that good came out of it?
Absolutely. The system has changed for the better. I believe it's 169 recommendations that were made.
Indeed. Let me put that to you, John. Justice Gouge made 169 recommendations. Any idea what percentage of them have been acted on?
I think pretty well all of the legislative recommendations were very quickly, within weeks, were adopted by the Ontario government.
And
put
has
into
that helped?
legislation. Yeah, I mean, I think Brenda's right. I think the system is in much better shape today than it was 15 or 20 years ago. Yes, definitely. You know, I think that the question, though, is it's very specific to the corner system and the overall issues that Charles Smith and the problems that his cases kind of illustrate. Issues of oversight, issues of accountability. Those issues are larger than the corner system. And there are other areas that the Gouge inquiry didn't have an opportunity or a mandate to look into that are just as vulnerable to those type of issues. You know, you don't have to look any further than Mother Risk. Mother Risk was a situation that just kind of unfolded in the past couple of years. A drug testing system that was set up at the hospital for sick children to, again, try to protect children and make sure that their parents didn't have drug addiction problems and were able to care for their kids, and those drug tests were used in child protection cases, and it was the same type of problems of, you know, lack of quality control, lack of oversight, and parents lost their children.
And some faulty test results.
And faulty test results led to parents losing their children when they shouldn't have. You know, so it speaks to the same issues. So yes, we have a better corner system, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have a better system overall.
Sure. In our last minute here, John, I want you, the guy at the center of the story you tried to get in touch with, he didn't respond to any of your emails. Where is Charles Smith today and what's he doing?
I don't know. I mean, I spent years, it took me 4.5 years to research and write this book, and throughout the course of it, I repeatedly tried to reach him.
The assumption is he's living out west somewhere, isn't that right?
I don't, like 9 years ago, at the time of the Gouge inquiry, that's where he was, but that was 9 years ago, and so it's hard to say if he's still out there or not.
He's disappeared, essentially.
He went to ground. After the inquiry, he's no longer practicing medicine, we know that. He was professionally reprimanded, his license was revoked, but yeah, he's disappeared.
Well, I commend you for telling the story, John Shipman. Death in the Family is the name of the book. Brenda, I commend you for cooperating with him and getting your story told in the hopes that this doesn't happen to anybody else ever again. It's an absolutely riveting read, and we thank both of you for coming into TVO tonight and sharing your views on it. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Steve.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.